Good evening, and welcome to Gaming by the Fire. If you're here, you're probably looking for a place to wind down. Maybe you need to decompress from your day or just want to get to sleep. My goal with this channel is exactly that, to create a space where nostalgia and imagination can help you find a little peace. For many of us, Final Fantasy IV is more than just a story, it's a memory. This video isn't a Wikipedia entry, or a beat-by-beat factual analysis, it's a story told through the feeling and experience of playing it. I was very young when I first played this game, and the story was so vast that I needed my older cousin to help me understand everything that was happening. It was there, between pixel characters and epic dialogue, that I first understood how video games could transport us to other worlds. To this day, Final Fantasy IV is that safe place I always go back to when I just want to relax. And that feeling of nostalgia and comfort is exactly what I hope you'll find in this video. So, get comfortable, and let our fire crackle. But before you drift off, I'd love to ask you for one thing: leave a comment below and tell me what this game means to you, or what other stories you'd like to hear. And while you're at it, feel free to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. From now on, the world of the Blue Planet and the journey of a dark knight seeking the light is yours. Let's begin. Chapter 1, The Dark Knight. The wind swept bright and sharp across the sky as Baron's fleet of flying ships drifted over rolling seas of cloud. On the deck of the flagship stood Cecil Harvey, captain of the Red Wings, encased in dark armor that caught the glare of the sun. The steel shone, but Cecil's heart carried no light. His thoughts stayed fixed on what they had just done: the assault on Mysidia, a city that had raised no weapons, and the taking of its water crystal. It had been an order. But the weight of it was his to bear. The strength he had trained for duty had fallen on the defenseless, and he could not turn from that truth. Cecil had always been brave, always loyal, but not to this. Not to fire falling on scholars or terror cast over a peaceful harbor. The Red Wing soared homeward, but remorse traveled with him, heavier than his armor. At last, the kingdom of Baron rose from the hills ahead, rivers glinting in the sun, towers steady and proud. Its walls promised the peace of homecoming, yet Cecil felt none of it. Bigan, captain of the guard, stood to receive them with a stare sharp enough to weigh a man against rumor. And in the throne room, the king himself, once a voice of balance, sat stern and changed, his rule hardened into something like fear. Cecil bowed, but not low enough to hide the question in his heart. He spoke with respect, yet dared to ask, why had a city of peace been made to suffer? Why were the crystals, meant to shelter the world, being gathered as trophies of power? The answer came not in reason, but in punishment. Cecil was stripped of command. The Red Wings, pride of Baron, were taken from his hands. In their place he was given a smaller task: to travel to the Valley of Mist, to deal with a beast on the road, and to deliver the bomb ring to the village beyond. That night, Cecil walked the castle corridors heavy with silence. Cid, master of engines and wings, caught him in passing, rumbling with half-joking concern, his bluster unable to hide the storm beneath. Later, in his chamber, came Rosa, gentle, steadfast, carrying the quiet warmth of someone who believed in him still. But Cecil could not meet her gaze. Shame and grief pressed him down, and the words she might have spoken drifted away unvoiced between them. Morning broke clear and cold. At Cecil's side stood Cain Highwind, dragoon, and closest of friends. Cain carried his lance with steady ease, every step a mark of discipline, every look calm as the sky itself. Cecil and Cain were near as brothers, bound by battles past, yet different as steel and flame. Together they set out, one a knight bound in shadow, the other a dragoon chasing the sky. The valley opened ahead, veiled in drifting fog. Cecil paused at its edge. The wind whispered across the grass. The mist moved like living breath under the morning sun. He knew the monster waiting there would not be the hardest foe he faced. Orders could weigh heavy, silence, heavier still. But the heaviest weight was the one he carried back from Mysidia, a burden no command could erase. Cecil drew a breath and stepped forward. Cain matched his stride, a quiet promise at his side. Somewhere beyond, a village waited, a ring boxed and ready, a task too simple to hide the shape of something wrong. The fog closed in, narrowing the road. The Dark Knight walked on, wondering if duty was meant to shield the weak, or simply to obey the strong. Chapter 2: The Tragedy of Mist. The kingdom of Baron slipped behind them, its towers and rivers fading in the light of dawn. Cecil, Harvey and Kane Highwind followed the winding road west, their boots pressing into wet earth as the hills gave way to stretches of woodland and rocky trails. The morning air was cool, filled with the chatter of unseen birds, yet the silence between the two men lingered heavier than their armor. The wilds beyond Baron were never truly safe. Packs of beasts prowled the forests and cliffs, waiting for travelers bold or unlucky enough to cross their path. Before long, a shrill cry broke through the trees, followed by the rush of small figures darting from the undergrowth. Goblins, a whole band of them, short and crooked, their green hides covered in scraps of leather and battered shoulder guards. Curved swords flashed in their hands as they swarmed, 8 at once, surrounding Cecil and Kane with snarls and sharp-toothed grins. Kane's response was swift. He lowered his lance, then leapt high into the air, vanishing into the canopy before crashing down with crushing force, scattering 2 goblins at once. Cecil moved with practiced precision, his dark blade cutting arcs of steel through the mob. The goblins pressed in, but their blows glanced harmlessly off armor forged for war. One by one they fell, until the forest floor was littered with broken blades and fleeing footsteps. It was over quickly. For soldiers of Baron, these were no more than skirmishes, familiar, almost routine. Yet the encounter was a reminder, the wild was restless, filled with claws and teeth, and the farther they strayed from the castle walls, the more the land itself seemed to resist. They pressed on. The road narrowed into broken trails, cliffs looming on either side. The air grew damp, the light dimmed, and before long the first threads of mist began to curl across the path. The world grew quiet again, the kind of silence that carried warning. And then, from somewhere deep within the fog, came a voice. Soft, echoing, unearthly. A plea for them to turn back. The cave of mist swallowed them whole. Its walls closed in, slick with condensation, torchlight flickering weak against the stone. The same voice rose again, trembling through the tunnels, urging retreat, begging them to leave. Cecil's breath caught. Something was watching. Something alive, something bound to the mission they had been sent to fulfill. The mist dragon emerged, vast and terrible, its body coiling with smoke and shadow, its eyes gleaming like embers in the dark. The battle thundered through the cavern. Kane's lance struck in arcs that echoed like lightning, while Cecil's blade carved with grim resolve, each swing heavy with his own darkness. At last, the dragon fell. But victory left no triumph, only silence heavy with dread. Something more had died than a beast. When they stepped from the cave, the village of mist appeared before them, veiled and still. For a breath, it seemed quiet. Then the truth revealed itself. The bomb ring flared open in Cecil's hands, its magic bursting into flame and horror. Monsters poured forth, fire swept across thatched roofs, and the cries of the villagers split the fog. Smoke, screams, the smell of burning wood, it was devastation unleashed, not by accident, but by order. Amid the ruin, they found a child. Rydia, a young summoner, clutching the lifeless form of her mother, the true caller of the mist dragon. Only then did Cecil understand the cruel design. The king did not fear only beasts. He feared the summoners themselves. This mission was no act of defense. It was an act of erasure. Rydia's grief broke into fury. With a cry torn from her soul, she summoned the Eidolon Titan. The earth roared. The ground split, opening fissures deep into the mountain. Stone crashed and soil fell away, tearing the road apart. In the chaos, Cecil and Kane were wrenched apart. The dragoon vanished into the collapse. Cecil was left alone, with the child who now hated him more than any foe. The mist closed in once more, shrouding the broken village in a haze of ash and sorrow. Cecil knelt beside Rydia, unsure if he reached to protect her or beg her forgiveness. He had marched into the valley as a dark knight weighed by guilt. Now he carried more than his own shadow. He bore the grief of a girl robbed of family, and the shame of a kingdom that made him its blade. The road ahead was gone, swallowed by mist and ruin. Yet Cecil knew he would have to walk it, carrying the child, and the weight of a world that refused to remain innocent. Chapter 3, The Cure and the Journey. The winds of the desert carried them westward. Cecil's armor weighed heavier with every step, and Rydia clung to his presence as if the world had shrunk to only the two of them. In Kaipo, however, the urgency changed shape. There, they found Rosa, stricken by the deadly desert fever. The light of her life seemed to waver with every breath. For Cecil, it was not merely another trial, it was the most painful sight he could endure, to see the woman he loved helpless, and to realize his own strength was not enough. The townsfolk spoke of a cure, only the sand ruby, guarded in Damsian, could banish the fever. Their path was set. Before they could cross the underground waterway, they met Tella, the sage. An old man with a long beard and sharp eyes, he carried not only the weight of years but also the certainty of his craft. He sought his daughter, Anna, who had disappeared with a wandering bard. His reasons were personal, yet fate aligned them as allies. At Cecil's side, Tella assumed the role of guide and mentor, and soon noticed the budding spark of magic within Rydia. Her incantations were clumsy, her flame unsteady, yet in her power he recognized rare potential, a gift that could blossom into greatness if nurtured. The passage through the caverns was harsh. Damp air clung to the stone walls, the smell of moss and salt filled every breath, and creatures lurked in every pool and shadow. Goblins of the waters, Sahajins, and slimes fell to Cecil's blade and Tella's thunder, while Rydia, growing in courage, summoned fire to banish the dark. Their true trial came in the cavern's heart, where the octomammoth stirred the underground waters with colossal fury. Tentacles lashed the walls and waves crashed against the stone. Cecil's sword kept the beast at bay, Tella's spells struck with relentless lightning, and Rydia, though trembling, cast her flames with determination. Their combined strength broke the monster, and the cavern grew still once more. Victory was short-lived. Emerging from the depths, they found not hope but devastation. The castle of Damsian was burning. The Red Wings airships rained fire upon the desert stronghold, its towers collapsing into ash and stone. The sky glowed with smoke and flame, and the cries of the dying echoed across the sands. Amid the ruins, Tella's worst fear came true. Anna, his daughter, lay mortally wounded. She had given her life to shield the bard she loved. Grief twisted into fury as Tella condemned the young man for weakness and folly, but Anna's final breath silenced his accusations. She confessed her love freely, her choice unshaken, and died with no regret upon her lips. Her loss transformed Tella. The name Galbez was revealed, a new master of Baron's forces, the cold mind behind the slaughter. Consumed by vengeance, Tella swore to strike him down and left the group, his path narrowing to that single purpose. In the silence that followed, only the bard remained. His name was Edward, and his heart was shattered. He confessed not only his grief but also his identity, Prince of Damsian, heir to a kingdom reduced to ashes. His sorrow was raw, his body frail, yet Cecil saw in him more than weakness. Rydia, still a child yet tempered by tragedy, regarded him with a blend of pity and demand, as if his survival alone bound him to move forward. On that night, while Damsian smoldered against the desert sky, their fellowship changed once again. Tella departed on his lonely path of vengeance, and Edward, reluctant yet bound by duty, took his place. Together they turned toward the antlion's den, where the sand ruby awaited. The world pressed its weight upon them, but the path ahead allowed no pause. Chapter 4, The Sand Ruby. The desert was endless. Dunes rolled in every direction like waves frozen in time, and the sun bore down without mercy. Cecil, Rydia, and Edward moved steadily across the shifting sands, each step a trial of will. They carried little water, and the heat pressed into their armor and skin until even the air felt heavy. Edward faltered often. His silks, once fit for a royal hall, were tattered and stained, clinging to him with sweat. Yet he pressed forward, not by strength but by something rawer, the memory of Anna, her voice still echoing in his mind. He knew that if he fell, her sacrifice would be meaningless. By the time they reached the cavern mouth, the desert had stripped them of all illusions. The entrance gaped wide, cool air whispering from its depths like a promise. They lit their torches and stepped inside. The antlion's den breathed with life. The walls shimmered with mineral veins, damp with condensation, and the silence was broken by skittering sounds from every direction, claws scraping stone, mandibles clicking in the dark. Then, with a violent shudder, the antlion itself emerged. Its carapace gleamed like burnished bronze, massive pincers snapping with bone-crushing force. Rows of black eyes glittered with hunger. It scuttled forward with terrifying speed, claws striking sparks against the cavern floor. The battle came hard and fast. Cecil braced himself, blade flashing against the beast's armored shell. Each strike rang out like hammer against anvil. Edward stumbled back at first, harp clutched tight, until desperation forced him to act, plucking a trembling note that rippled strangely through the air. The melody carried no steel, no fire, but it staggered the antlion, slowing its advance. Rydia stood firm, lips moving in quiet invocation. Cold shimmered around her as ice burst forth, searing across the creature's flank. The antlion reared back, shrieking, but charged again, pincers clashing against Cecil's armor. The force nearly knocked him from his feet, yet he held the line. Again and again they pressed their assault, Cecil's sword driving deep between the plates of its shell, Rydia's magic piercing its defenses, Edward's music disrupting its rhythm. At last, Cecil lunged, his blade plunging into the soft seam beneath its head. The beast convulsed, shuddered, and collapsed in a violent tremor that shook dust from the cavern ceiling. The den fell silent. Where the antlion had fallen, a soft glow pulsed. The sand ruby lay among the shards of shell, gleaming as though it held a fragment of the desert's very soul. They carried it back across the dunes, the jewel lighting their way through the night. By the time they returned to Kaipo, exhaustion hung over them like a shadow, but so too did hope. Inside the small desert town, Rosa lay pale and still, her breath shallow with the grip of the desert fever. Cecil held the sand ruby above her, and the glow spread like warm sunlight. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks. Her lips parted with a faint sigh, her body loosening as though freed from invisible chains. Cecil's shoulders sank with relief. For the first time in days, he could breathe. Rosa opened her eyes, weak but steady, and when her gaze met Cecil's, it was enough to silence every doubt and every shadow for that moment. She was alive. But the world would not wait for them. Rumors spread quickly, Baron's fleet had moved again, its ambitions stretching further, its cruelty unchecked. The group had little time to linger. That night, as they prepared for the road ahead, Edward slipped from the inn. The desert winds whispered through Kaipo's silent streets. He carried only his harp, and with it the memory of Anna. Yet the water hag, a creature of mist and vengeance, rose from the riverbanks, its form twisting and fluid. Edward's heart pounded. He was no Cecil, no dragoon, no sorcerer. He was a prince with a harp, brittle as glass in the eyes of warriors. But grief and love had shaped him into something more. He raised the instrument and struck its strings, each note echoing through the night. The melody was mournful, yet resolute, weaving through the air like a shield. The water hag lunged, claws of liquid striking with force. Edward stumbled but did not falter. Again his music rose, the vibrations carrying through the air, disrupting the monster's form. Blow after blow, he answered not with steel, but with sound, until at last the creature dissolved back into the river, leaving only ripples in its wake. Edward stood trembling, the night quiet once more. He had not fought with strength, but with will. In that silence, he realized that Anna's courage was not gone, it lived in him now, urging him onward. He returned to the inn, weary but changed, ready to stand beside Cecil and Rydia not only as a grieving lover, but as a companion with his own resolve. And so, with Rosa restored, the company set their eyes toward the future. The desert lay behind them, but greater storms gathered ahead. Chapter 5, The Battle of Fabul. The desert lay behind them, and Kaipo had become a fading memory. Rosa, cured of the desert fever by the sand pearl, now walked at Cecil's side. No longer the frail figure clinging to life in a sickbed, she was once again the white mage of Baron, healer, archer, and steadfast companion. Her bow rested across her back, her staff at her side, and with every spell she cast to ease the wounds of her friends, Cecil was reminded that Rosa was never someone to be protected out of pity. She was a warrior in her own right, and her resolve to face the growing darkness matched his own. Their path led to the icy ridges of Mount Hobbs, where the snow bit into skin and the wind clawed at every step. The trail, however, was blocked by walls of frost and flame. Rydia faltered, the memory of her village still seared into her heart. Fire had taken everything from her, now it demanded to be her tool. Rosa's hand touched the girl's shoulder, not forcing but steadying, and Cecil stood silent at her other side. Between them, Rydia found the courage to lift her hands and conjure the very element she feared. The flames burst forward, trembling as she did, until they melted the barrier away. For the first time since Mist, she bent fire to her will instead of cowering from it. On the other side of the pass, the group discovered a lone figure standing amid the bodies of fallen monks. His strikes were fierce and exact, yet exhaustion weighed on his frame. This was Yang Fong Liden, master of Fabul's martial order. He had led his disciples here for training when monsters, drawn by some darker force, descended upon them. His students had fallen one by one, and only Yang remained, fighting with the discipline of a man who refused to surrender even when hope was lost. Joining forces with Cecil's party, Yang's fists and disciplined movements became a natural extension of the group's strength. Every kick scattered foes, every focused strike broke through scales and armor. He spoke little, but his actions carried the weight of devotion and mastery. By the time they reached Fabul, it was clear that Yang was more than an ally. He was a bastion of discipline in a world sliding into chaos. The kingdom of Fabul braced for war. The red wings darkened the skies, their airships blotting out the sun like storm clouds. Soldiers gathered in the courtyards, but their eyes betrayed fear. Yang moved among them, correcting stances, steadying nerves, reminding each man that discipline was its own kind of shield. Rosa healed the wounded, her prayers a quiet balm against the rising storm. Even Edward, still burdened by grief, raised his harp, its notes carrying courage through the ranks. For a fleeting moment, the castle seemed ready. But each victory only forced them back another step. From the walls, to the courtyards, to the inner halls, the retreat was relentless. Cecil felt the weight of every life lost in those corridors, every cry of pain echoing behind him. Still, they pressed on, defending what ground they could. At last, the survivors gathered in the crystal chamber itself, the monks forming a final line around the relic they swore to protect. It was there that Cecil's worst fear materialized. From the shadows of the chamber strode Cain Highwind, once his brother in arms, now servant to a darker will. There were no words, no chance for reason. The two men clashed, steel against steel, each blow sparking memories of battles fought side by side. Yet Cain's lance struck with unrelenting force, his body bound to Galbez's command. Cecil's hesitation cost him dearly. A final, devastating leap carried Cain high into the air, and when he fell, Cecil was driven to the floor, his blade torn from his grasp. The chamber fell silent as Galbez himself entered, tall and implacable, his voice cold as stone. None could stand before him. Monks and warriors alike were cast aside as if they were leaves in a storm. The wind crystal was claimed with a single gesture, its light swallowed by his hand. And with the same cruel efficiency, he turned to Rosa. She cried out once before being swept into the darkness, carried away before Cecil could rise to stop him. When the echoes faded, Fabul was left in ruins. The defenders lay scattered, the crystal was gone, and Rosa, Cecil's dearest, was a captive of their enemy. For Cecil, the defeat was not just on the battlefield, but in his heart. He had faced his closest friend in combat, failed to protect those who depended on him, and watched the woman he loved vanish into the night. The survivors stood amidst the wreckage, grief heavy in the air. Yet even in that silence, Cecil knew the path before him had not ended. Galbez had revealed his strength, and Cain had shown the cost of hesitation. The road ahead would demand more than steel, it would demand a resolve that no shadow could bend. Chapter 6: The Path Toward Light. The ship drifted quietly across the waves, its sails full of a steady wind. Cecil often found himself at the prow, eyes set upon the horizon yet turned inward, weighed by questions of guilt and hope. The sea, endless and calm at times, seemed to echo the rhythm of his thoughts. For every swell that lifted the vessel gently skyward, there was a reminder of the long road behind him, and the uncertain road ahead. But the calm was not to last. From the depth stirred a presence vast and ancient. The waters shivered, then rose, and the sea gave birth to the Leviathan. It was less a beast than a force of nature, its great shape rising like a mountain of living water. With a single sweep, the world tilted. The ship groaned and swayed, timbers straining under the weight of the waves. Amid the sudden rush, Cecil caught sight of Rydia. She stood only for a moment, her green hair lifted by the spray, before a surge of water reached across the deck and drew her away. Her small form slipped into the foam, the sea claiming her as gently and as surely as it had risen. Cecil's voice caught in his throat, but the storm silenced it, and she was gone. The ship could not endure the Leviathan's call. Mast and sail yielded to the deep, and in the next breath, Cecil too was taken by the water. The world became cold and weightless. Then came stillness, followed by the sand beneath his hands and the hush of distant waves. He awoke upon the shore of Mysidia. The town stood close by, its spires and white stone softened by the morning light. But to Cecil it was no ordinary sight. He had once brought ruin here, carrying out the orders of a kingdom that had lost its way. Now he arrived alone, stripped of friends and purpose, with only memory as his companion. The people of Mysidia recognized him, and though they did not raise blade or flame, their judgment was no less heavy. Magic lingered in the air, slowing his steps, dulling his strength. Each movement felt as if the very land pressed upon him, reminding him of all he had taken. At the heart of the town he met the elder, whose eyes seemed to hold the stillness of time itself. The old man did not speak in anger. Instead, he looked at Cecil as one looks into a mirror that shows both shadow and light. The elder told him there was one path left, to climb Mount Ordeals, and there to face himself. Only in confronting his own darkness could he hope to walk another road. Cecil would not go alone. Two children, twins of curious spirit, stepped forward. Palom, quick-tongued and restless, carried fire in both his words and his magic. Porum, gentler and steady, balanced her brother's flame with patience. Their presence was not solemn, but lively, as though the weight of Cecil's journey might be eased, in part, by the brightness of youth. And so, with the waves of the sea still echoing in his ears and the memory of Rydia fading into the deep, Cecil set his gaze toward Mount Ordeals. The path was steep, and the trials unseen, yet the air seemed to whisper of change. In each step lay the promise of forgiveness, and the quiet hope that the light he sought might still be waiting for him at the summit. Chapter 7, The Mountain of Ordeals. Mount Ordeals rose in stillness, its slopes shrouded by drifting mist, its silence broken only by the wind. Cecil climbed steadily, each step heavy with the weight of his past. He still wore the black armor that had carried him through battles he wished he could forget, and though his body moved forward, his heart felt anchored to every mistake behind him. At his side, Palom and Porum filled the quiet with chatter and bursts of magic that flared like fireflies along the path. Their energy was restless, irreverent, and yet grounding, reminding Cecil that not all journeys had to be swallowed in silence. Soon another traveler joined them. Tella, the sage, stood at the mountain's base, his staff planted firmly in the earth. Age had bent his shoulders, but grief had hardened his gaze. He spoke of Meteor, the lost spell he sought to reclaim, and of vengeance against Galbez, who had taken his daughter's life. Cecil welcomed him, yet felt unease, for Tella's heart seemed set upon the very shadows Cecil longed to leave behind. The climb grew harsher. From the fog rose Scarmiglione, archfiend of earth, his presence steeped in decay. Undead poured forth at his command, their grasping hands a reminder of all that clung to Cecil from the past. The battle was fierce, but together they endured. Tella's spells seared the darkness, the twins' fire lit the path, and Cecil's blade cut through the tide. When the fiend fell, it was not triumph Cecil felt, but a forewarning. Shadows had many faces, and the greatest waited still. At the summit, the mountain revealed its true trial. A voice, distant yet intimate, called Cecil son. And from the light emerged a figure he knew at once, the Dark Knight, a mirror of himself, armored in every sin he had carried. The duel was merciless, yet one-sided. Each strike from the shadow landed with the weight of Cecil's regrets, but Cecil found no victory in answering blow for blow. In that moment, he understood, his enemy was not to be destroyed but released. He lowered his weapon, bore the pain, and chose endurance over aggression. The shadow faltered, faded, and vanished into the light. Cecil's armor of darkness dissolved, replaced by radiance that felt not imposed, but born within. No longer a knight of destruction, he stood as a protector, a warrior of light who would fight not for conquest, but for those he loved. Tella watched in silence. In Cecil's transformation, the sage recovered what he had lost, the memory of Meteor. Yet where Cecil's new strength came with peace, Tella's came with renewed fury. His face was set, his vow sharpened, he would wield this power not for balance, but for vengeance. As they descended the mountain, Palom and Porum glanced at Cecil with awe, whispering to one another about the men who had faced himself and changed. They had been sent to watch him, to measure his worth. Now they knew. Behind them, Mount Ordeals kept its silence, as if sealing what had transpired. Ahead lay a path still haunted by Galvez and his schemes. But within Cecil burned a new light, and at his side, a companion whose path was leading ever deeper into shadow. Chapter 8, Return to Baron. After the light of Mount Ordeals, Cecil and his companions descended once more to Mysidia. Though the path ahead was uncertain, the elder knew that the time had come for Cecil to return to the kingdom that had shaped, and scarred, his past. To aid him, he opened the Devil's Road, a hidden passage of shifting light that bent through dimensions, linking Mysidia to the very heart of Baron. It was more than a shortcut. It was a symbolic bridge, carrying Cecil from the shadows of what he had been toward the uncertain brightness of what he might yet become. Baron looked the same, yet it was not. The city's familiar walls carried a stillness that felt heavy, as though every stone bore witness to secrets best left unspoken. Within its castle, Cecil faced a bitter trial. Yang, once his steadfast ally, stood as an enemy, his will bent by Galbez's unseen hand. The clash was swift and sharp, but Cecil's new strength and the steady magic of Palom and Porum freed the monk from the fog that clouded him. Yang, his eyes clearing, returned to the group with shame and gratitude, pledging once more to walk at Cecil's side. But loyalty was not always as it seemed. Soon after, Baigan, the captain of Baron's guard, welcomed them with words of trust. For a moment, hope stirred that an old friend might be reclaimed. Yet the twins, ever alert, sensed the corruption beneath his form. Their magic stripped away the disguise, revealing Baigan for what he had become, a creature twisted by deception. The battle left Cecil quiet and reflective, reminded that betrayal often lurked behind the faces once most familiar. Deeper still within the castle, they reached the throne. The figure waiting there wore the guise of the king of Baron, but Cecil's heart knew otherwise. The warmth of the sovereign who had raised him was absent. Cagnazzo, the fiend of water, had taken the throne, his laughter filling the hall like an echo in deep caverns. The fight was long, yet Cecil and his allies pressed forward, their unity steadying them against the waves of his sorcery. When Cagnazzo finally fell, the hall grew silent, but the silence carried little comfort. In the aftermath, Cecil discovered a friend thought lost. Sid, the master engineer of the airships, had been held captive within the castle walls. His release brought a rare moment of joy, his voice booming with the warmth of old times. For a heartbeat, the group felt whole again. But Cagnazzo had left behind one final cruelty. As they turned to leave, the castle itself betrayed them. Walls began to shift and close, stone grinding against stone, sealing off escape. The air grew heavy, and panic pressed against every breath. It was then that the twins acted. Palom and Porum, still so young, yet far wiser than their years, shared a glance of quiet resolve. With no hesitation, they invoked their magic upon themselves, turning their own bodies to stone to brace the walls apart. In that instant, the crashing doom was stayed, but so too were the children lost. The hall fell still. Cecil reached toward them, his voice faltering as stone skin met his touch. The weight of their choice pressed upon him with a sorrow deeper than battle. They had trusted him enough to sacrifice themselves, believing in the path he had chosen. Baron, once a place of pride and loyalty, had become a stage where truth and betrayal tangled in equal measure. Yang returned, Sid reclaimed, Baigan revealed, and at the heart of it all, 2 young souls given in exchange for the lives of the rest. Cecil left the castle with a heavier heart, yet also with a renewed sense of duty. The light he had embraced on the mountain did not shield him from loss. It simply gave him the strength to endure it, and to carry forward the memory of those who had given everything for the hope that light might prevail. Chapter 9, The Magnetic Cavern and the Courage of a Prince. The skies above Baron opened wide for the Enterprise, a vessel of air and freedom. Its wings promised speed, its frame promised reach, yet the weight it carried was not metal but memory. Cecil, no longer the dark knight but not yet at peace, guided his companions forward. The silence of Palom and Porum lingered in his heart, two young souls who had given everything so others might walk on. Their absence made every gust of wind feel heavier, every mile of sky more solemn. The mission was simple in command, yet cruel in spirit: recover the Earth Crystal and deliver it, or Rosa's life would be lost. Over the clouds, the familiar shadow of Cain appeared at the head of the Red Wings. Once a brother in arms, he now served as Galbez's voice, his eyes hollow, his words stripped of warmth. No plea reached him, no memory stirred him. He spoke only the demand, the crystal, in exchange for Rosa. The trail led the group to Troia, a kingdom guarded not by armies but by priestesses whose voices carried the authority of ages. Yet even here the crystal was gone. It had been stolen, they explained, by the dark elf, who hid within a cavern wrapped in strange and hostile power. The mountain itself rebelled against intruders. Inside the cavern, the air shimmered with an unseen force. Cecil's blade, heavy with its metallic core, faltered in his hands. Sid's armor weighed him down, each movement like walking through deep water. Even Tella's staff trembled in the pull of the magnetic field. What once was strength now became a burden. Every step forward was not a clash of steel but a quiet endurance against a foe they could not strike. When despair seemed ready to settle over them, a sound carried faintly, impossibly, through stone and distance. It was a harp, gentle and steady. Edward, far away in Troia, confined to rest after his wounds, had lifted his instrument once more. The notes traveled as if borne by courage itself, weaving through the cavern and into the hearts of his companions. His music weakened the spell that bound them, loosening the grip of the magnetic field, and reminded Cecil and the others that strength does not always live in armor or blade. With their spirits lifted, the group pressed on. Against the dark elf's illusions and rage, they stood together, Tella's wisdom, Sid's resolve, and Cecil's light now free to shine. Victory came not in a roar but in a release, the kind of triumph that felt more like a prayer than a battle cry. The Earth Crystal was recovered, its glow soft and steady in their hands. Yet joy did not follow. They remembered Cain's voice, cold and unwavering, demanding its surrender. The crystal was theirs for now, but already it seemed borrowed, already its light felt fragile. Still, the echo of Edward's harp lingered. A prince thought broken had found his way to stand tall, not with steel or command, but with the quiet courage of a song. And through that act, Cecil and his companions carried the crystal back into the world, knowing that even the faintest light could guide them through the deepest dark. Chapter 10, The Tower of Zot. The Tower of Zot rose above the clouds, its spires catching the light of the sun but casting only shadow below. Within, the air seemed to thrum with malice, each corridor bending inward like the ribs of some ancient beast. Cecil and his companions entered with the Earth Crystal in hand, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that it was not victory they carried, but ransom. Rosa's life hung upon its delivery. The climb was relentless. At each turn, the tower offered not silence but cruelty. Twisted guardians emerged to block their way, first monstrous machines of steel and sorcery, then a trio of uncanny sisters. The Magus sisters, draped in colors too bright for such a place, sang their spells in a mocking chorus, weaving their magic together in patterns that seemed impossible to break. Their strange beauty masked a deadly precision, and the battle stretched on like a fever dream. Yet Cecil's company, worn but resolute, pressed through. With every victory, the tower grew heavier upon their shoulders, as if testing how much weight they could bear before breaking. At the summit, the test reached its cruelest form. Rosa was there, bound and silent, her eyes steady even as her strength waned. Beside her stood Galbez, calm as stone, his will a force as suffocating as the tower itself. Tella could endure no more. All the grief of his daughter's death, all the rage of a father denied justice, poured into a single moment. He spoke the words of the ancient magic, the one no mortal body was meant to hold. Meteors rained upon Galbez, shattering the chamber with light and fury. But vengeance is a fire that consumes what it touches. Galbez survived the onslaught, wounded but unbroken, and Tella's body gave way. He fell in silence, his spirit spent, leaving only the echo of his final act. It was then that Cain staggered forward, the spell upon him broken. His voice trembled with shame as he confessed that Galbez had bent him with ease, seizing upon the secret love he bore for Rosa. That longing had become the crack through which corruption poured. Cecil's answer came not with anger, but with quiet resolve. He offered no rebuke, only forgiveness. For the path of the paladin was not one of judgment, but of mercy. In that moment, the bond between them, once shattered, began to mend. Rosa was freed, and her healing touch eased the wounds of body and spirit alike. The companions, though scarred by loss, stood together once more, not fewer, but stronger in the unity forged by grief, compassion, and love. Yet as they descended, a final shadow crossed their path. Rubicante, archfiend of fire, appeared not with cruelty but with poise, offering a warning rather than a strike. His presence was a reminder that greater trials waited still, and that the battle for the Earth's future had only just begun. The Tower of Zot had given back Rosa, restored Cain, and taken Tella forever. What lingered as they left its gates was not vengeance, but the quiet strength of forgiveness, proof that even in the darkest halls, compassion could be a light that endures. Chapter 11, The Underworld. The Enterprise cut across the skies, its sails full of firelight from the engines below. For the first time in many days, Cecil steered the vessel not toward loss, but toward purpose. At his side, Rosa moved with quiet grace, her presence steadying the shadows that lingered from Zot. And there was Cain, returned at last from Galbez's thrall, his eyes clear though lined with guilt. He spoke with the weight of a man who had seen himself used like a blade. Galbez's plan, Cain revealed, reached deeper than the surface kingdoms. The crystals that Cecil and his friends had fought so hard to defend were only half of the whole. Their counterparts lay beneath the earth, guarded by the dwarves in their subterranean realm. If Galbez united them all, he could awaken a weapon of legend, the giant of Babil, a colossus said to stride across nations and bring ruin to all who opposed him. The truth struck like iron, they had not been fighting merely for the fate of kingdoms, but for the fate of the entire planet. And so the Enterprise turned downward, its nose toward the volcanic scar that yawned wide into the underworld. The descent was like falling through fire. Ash swirled, the heat of magma licked at the ship's frame, and the sky itself seemed to narrow to a tunnel of flame. When at last they burst through, the world below stretched out vast and alien, a land of glowing rivers of molten rock, mountains of black stone, and skies the color of embers. Great machines rumbled across the plains, dwarven tanks bristling with cannons, locked in ceaseless battle against the Red Wings. At the heart of this realm stood the dwarven castle, its walls of obsidian carved into shapes both proud and stern. Inside, King Giant greeted them with the booming voice of a monarch forged by war. His people, stout and unyielding, had fought Galbez's forces to a bitter stalemate. Yet even here, the crystals were in danger. Galbez had already begun his siege. No sooner had the king spoken than the castle itself trembled. Dark soldiers poured through the gates, and above them, a shadow greater still, Galbez. He appeared not as rumor or threat, but as presence, vast and suffocating. In the throne room, his power crushed the air, and with a wave of his hand, he seemed ready to end the battle before it could even begin. Cecil and his companions fought with desperate resolve, but their strength faltered before his might. Hope flickered and seemed on the verge of collapse. Then, as if from the very heart of the underworld, another voice rose. A blaze of emerald light split the darkness, and there she stood, Rydia. No longer the child they had lost at sea, but grown into her power, her eyes bright with wisdom gathered in another world. She spoke little, but her summons spoke for her, a titan of flame and stone crashing into the fray, driving Galbez back where steel and spell had failed. The battle turned. Galbez, wounded, withdrew into shadow, leaving only the echo of his promise that this was not the end. In his absence, silence fell heavy across the hall. The companions turned to Rydia, scarcely believing, yet knowing it was her. She smiled softly, and in her eyes they saw both the child they had lost and the woman she had become. For Cecil, it was a moment of both relief and renewal. Tella was gone, Palom and Porum were gone, Yang's fate uncertain, but here was Rydia, returned not as a memory but as a strength renewed. Together, beneath the burning skies of the underworld, the fellowship was whole again. Chapter 12, The Sealed Cave. The underworld was a land of contrasts, lava rivers glowing like veins of fire, caverns carved into fortresses, and cities of dwarves who thrived in the very heart of the earth. Their lives were bound to the crystals more deeply than the people of the surface could understand. To the dwarves, the crystals were not treasures to hoard, but guardians of balance, the very breath of the world itself. King Giant, crowned in iron and ash, welcomed Cecil's party as allies, yet his face carried the weight of despair. One crystal had already fallen into Galbez's grasp, and the Archfiend's ambition was clear: he sought them all. With both surface and subterranean crystals united, he could awaken a weapon from legend, the Giant of Babil, a colossus said to consume whole nations in a single stride. For all the dwarves' vigilance, the threat pressed closer. Their most sacred relic lay hidden in the sealed cave, its entrance bound by wards older than memory. Yet the king knew those wards would not withstand Galbez forever. He entrusted Cecil and his companions with the task of retrieving the crystal and placing it under guard within the dwarves' capital. The journey to the cave was long and strange. Across the underworld, they passed sprawling forges where molten rivers were tamed into armor, markets where dwarves bartered not just for goods but for stories, and fields of crystalline fungi that glowed with their own light. Among these people, Rydia walked with a quiet awe. The monsters of this realm were not foes to be slain but neighbors, bound to dwarves by old pacts of coexistence. Here she saw for the first time a world where summoners were not feared, but respected. The girl who once fled from fire now found herself belonging to it. At the mouth of the sealed cave, the air was heavy with enchantment. Doors carved from living stone towered before them, marked by runes that glowed faintly as Cain stepped forward. With his spear lowered, he admitted the truth: Galbez's command had once twisted his will, and he feared his weakness might yet betray them. Cecil laid a hand upon his shoulder. Forgiveness had already been spoken in the Tower of Zot, and here it was given weight. No spell could bind a man forever, not if trust was renewed. Inside, the sealed cave was less a passage than a gauntlet. Each door they crossed seemed alive, stone faces twisting into monstrous guardians. With every step deeper, the cave tested not only their strength but their unity. Tella's absence was felt like an open wound, yet Rose's prayers and Rydia's summons filled that silence with new resilience. At last, in the deepest chamber, the crystal awaited them, glowing as though lit from within by the heartbeat of the world. For a moment, hope returned: it was still safe, still untouched. But as Cecil's hand reached toward it, the shadows stirred. A monstrous guardian, woven of living darkness, rose to block their claim. The battle that followed shook the cavern. Spells clashed with shrieks, steel met stone, and even the light of the crystal dimmed under the creature's rage. Yet together they endured, striking in rhythm until the guardian fell silent. Exhausted but unbroken, they claimed the crystal. But fate was crueler than their victory. As they emerged into the ashen light of the underworld, the air shifted, growing thick and suffocating. Galbez's laughter echoed around them, cold and triumphant. He had not needed to breach the seal, he had let them do the work for him. As Cecil clutched the crystal, a blur of blue and steel moved faster than thought. Cain's lance did not strike a foe, but swept in a vicious arc, smashing into Cecil's wrist. The shock was not in the pain, but in the perpetrator. The crystal flew from Cecil's grasp, and in the same fluid motion, Cain caught it midair. His eyes were clouded, not entirely his own. Somewhere behind them a struggle lingered, but Galbez's command smothered it. Every bond of friendship, every memory of a shared childhood, buried beneath a will stronger than his own. There was no struggle, no moment of resistance. Only the seamless execution of a command implanted long ago. As Galbez took the prize, his victory was complete. He had not just stolen a crystal, he had stolen their brother from them once again, and he had used Cain's own hand to do it. the companions staggered back into the dwarves' capital with empty hands. King Giant's face grew pale beneath his beard. Galbez's collection was nearly complete. Only a fragile few crystals remained, and soon even they would not be enough to keep the giant from waking. Yet in the shadows of that despair, something else endured. Cecil's companions had not splintered. They had faced the darkness of the sealed cave and had come out still bound together, their trust reforged as surely as steel in dwarven flame. And though Galbez held the crystal, they held each other. That, too, was power, if they could endure long enough to wield it. For a long moment, only the muffled rhythm of distant forges broke the oppressive silence of the throne room. The taste of defeat was bitter on their tongues. What more could be done? The answer came not as a whisper, but as a tremor. A deep-throated roar echoed from the direction of the feared tower, and the ground shook under their feet. A sinister light, violet and black, flared on the horizon, not the giant itself, but the Tower of Babil stirring to life. The king's voice was heavy with dread, the enemy was drawing ever closer to awakening the colossus. The king's voice was a whisper of horror. The giant was no longer a threat for the future, it was waking. Defense was no longer an option, only a desperate, final attack remained. The choice was made for them. There was no time for grief or plans. With a single, resolved look between the rest of the group, they turned toward the source of the profane light. The path to the Tower of Babil was open, and it led straight into the heart of the darkness. Chapter 13, Sacrifice. The Tower of Babil loomed over the underworld like a scar upon the sky, its walls bristling with iron and fire. Guided by the counsel of King Giant, Cecil and his companions pressed forward, each step heavy with the knowledge that this fortress housed not only the stolen crystals, but also the cruel designs of Dr. Lugi. Inside, the tower was alive with traps. Cannons hissed, gears clattered, and steel claws reached from the walls as if the fortress itself meant to crush them. Yang, calm and steadfast, moved at the front, deflecting blows and guiding his friends through the chaos. His strength was not only in his fists, but in his unwavering resolve, a shield as sure as any blade. At the heart of the tower, the machines grew louder, their fire threatening to annihilate the dwarves who fought alongside them. In that instant, Yang made a choice only true courage allows. With a final glance toward his friends, he dashed into the chamber of engines, striking with all the force of his spirit. The last they heard was his voice, steady and sure, before the cannons fell silent in a blaze that swallowed him from sight. Whether he lived or perished, none could tell, only that his sacrifice had bought them a chance to fight another day. The group scarcely had time to grieve. As they fled the collapsing tower, Galbez struck once more, collapsing the bridge that was their only escape. But above the smoke, a familiar sound echoed, the beating wings of the Enterprise. Sid, laughing even in the face of peril, guided the airship to their side and carried them away from ruin. Yet safety was fleeting. The red wings closed in, and Sid, with a smile that masked his sorrow, seized the controls. He leapt to action, sealing the passage to the underworld with an explosion only he could trigger. His sacrifice was not in despair, but in devotion, a final gift to ensure his friends lived on. The survivors, weary but unbroken, returned to Baron for repairs. The Enterprise was reforged, stronger than before, though the hearts within it carried fresh scars. Their journey led them next into the caverns of Eblin, where silence and ruin marked the cost of war. Empty halls spoke of lives scattered, homes burned. And at the heart of this broken kingdom, amid ruins still smoldering from war, they found its last defender. A figure in violet and steel, blades flashing faster than sight, danced between flames with reckless grace. This was Edge, Prince of Eblin, ninja, heir, and rogue in equal measure. His strikes were swift, his words quicker still, for even as he faced the archfiend of fire, he met the darkness with a grin, as though daring fate itself to keep up. Yet charm could not shield him from loss. When Rubicon's fire threatened to consume what little remained, Cecil and his companions stepped forward. Edge, stubborn and unyielding, protested at first. He was no man to accept charity, but in their eyes he found not pity, but kinship. Together they stood, and together they drove Rubicante back, though the cost cut deeper than steel. In Edge burned not only vengeance, but life itself, a spark that refused to die, even in the blackest ruin. In him, the Fellowship found not just another sword, but a flame of spirit that would carry them through trials yet to come. In the Tower of Babil, Edge's heart was tested more cruelly than any blade could cut. His parents, twisted by Lugi's experiments into forms unrecognizable, lingered only long enough to speak their final words of love before freeing themselves from their torment. Edge's cry filled the stone halls, not with anger alone, but with grief too vast for words. The group stood beside him, bound not just by battle but by shared sorrow. They knew that war demanded not only strength, but endurance, the will to rise after every loss, to carry onward even when hope seemed fragile. And so, though the Underworld offered no mercy, Cecil and his friends pressed on. Each sacrifice lit a flame within them, a quiet reminder that true heroes are not those untouched by pain, but those who walk through it, carrying light for others when the night grows deepest. Chapter 14, The Ascension of the Blue Planet. From the ashes of the Tower of Babil, the heroes found not despair, but a spark of hope. Amid the smoke and despair, hope awaited them still. The dwarves revealed a hidden vessel, the Falcon, a ship of strength and promise, capable of soaring even through rivers of molten fire. With it, they rose from the darkness of the Underworld, breaking once more into the light of the surface. There they discovered a miracle: Sid still lived. Though weakened from his sacrifice, the old engineer's spirit remained unbroken. Even from his bed, his hands itched to work, and soon the Falcon bore new armor of mithril, its wings hardened to cross the rivers of molten fire that scarred the land below. Their journey next led them into places of wonder and memory. In the Cave of Sylphs, they found Yang, his body still, his spirit guarded by the whispering Fae. At first, he could not hear their voices. But with the simplest of gifts, a frying pan sent by his devoted wife, Yang awoke. He smiled faintly, not for his own sake, but for theirs. Though Yang would not march beside them again, his bond with the Sylphs became their strength, their voices promising to fight in his stead. In Baron, the ghost of the true king appeared, granting them the power of Odin, as if to say the kingdom itself had not forgotten its protector. In Mysidia, the elder gathered his people in prayer. Their voices lifted skyward, weaving together a summons older than any kingdom. From the depths of the ocean rose the lunar whale, a vessel not of wood or steel but of legend itself, its form gleaming with the promise of the heavens. So the path was clear. From the caverns of the earth to the skies above, every step had been a climb, every trial a test of endurance. Now their ascent would reach beyond the world itself, to the red moon where destiny awaited. Each bore scars, each carried memories of sacrifice, but as the Falcon and the whale stood ready, Cecil and his companions felt the truth of their journey, that even the deepest shadows could be left behind, and that the blue planet itself longed to rise. Chapter 15, The Moon. The lunar whale glided to rest on silver ground, its hull catching the pale light of a world beyond dreams. Above them, the blue planet rose on the horizon, distant yet ever-present, a reminder of all they had sworn to protect. Cecil and his companions set foot on the moon, their steps hushed against the silent dust, as though even the land itself awaited what was to come. At the heart of this realm stood the Crystal Palace, radiant and timeless. Within its crystalline halls dwelt Fusoya, guardian of the Lunarians, a being whose eyes carried both the weight of eternity and the tenderness of a watchful father. He spoke of his people, a race who had chosen slumber, waiting for the blue planet to grow into its own, while one among them refused the dream of peace. Xemuse, consumed by hatred, reached out from his sleep to bend mortals to his will, and through his power had ensnared Galbez, driving the collection of the crystals to awaken the terrible giant of Babil. But even darker truths awaited. Fusoya revealed that the voice Cecil had heard on Mount Ordeals had been no stranger, but his father, Clea, a Lunarian who had once descended to the blue planet. There he had guided humankind, and there he had left behind two sons, Galbez, the elder, and Cecil, the younger. Brother against brother, though neither had known it until now. The revelation struck Cecil like a blade, yet it also lit a fire within him. Galbez was not merely an enemy, but blood, bound, as he was, by the touch of Zemu's malice. Cecil felt the weight of sorrow, but also the spark of hope. If Zemu's grip could be broken, perhaps his brother might yet be freed. The moon had given them its truths, of worlds entwined, of legacies hidden, of battles yet to come. With Fusoya at their side, Cecil and his companions turned their gaze once more to the blue planet. For what awaited below was no longer just a war for survival, but the final struggle for both family and future. Chapter 16, The Giant of Babil. The wail of the moon carried Cecil and his companions back to the skies of the blue planet. They thought the world might at last rest, but in the distance, the mountains shuddered, and the earth groaned. From the depths of the Tower of Babil, a colossal shape arose, the Giant of Babil, a machine of steel and malice, striding forward as though the very planet were its battlefield. For a moment, despair threatened to take hold. How could a handful of weary travelers stand against such a titan? Yet hope did not come from them alone. From Mysidia, the skies glittered with spells as white and black magic wove together. From Baron, the red wings filled the clouds with fire, their cannons shaking the air. From Eblin, shadows danced across the battlefield, blades striking unseen. Even the dwarves, voices booming like thunder, clashed steel against steel. Across the blue planet, voices rose in defiance, not separate, but one. The world itself answered the call. Through fire and thunder, the falcon pierced the enemy's defenses, carrying Cecil, Rosa, Rydia, Cain, Edge, and Fusoya into the giant's very heart. Its corridors pulsed with strange machines, guardians of metal and flame. Each battle was a trial, each step a test of resolve, yet they pressed on, bound not by orders but by the will to protect their home. At last they reached the control chamber, and there stood Galbez. Cecil's brother, still wrapped in shadows, raised his hand in defiance. Fusoya's voice rang out, deep and sorrowful, unraveling the darkness like glass splintering under light. The chains around Galbez broke first, shadows peeling away to reveal the weary men beneath. Then, as though the same thread had bound them both, Cain staggered free, the fog lifting from his gaze. Their silence in that moment was heavier than any cry of battle, a stillness that spoke of guilt, of loss, and the fragile chance of beginning again. The giant, robbed of its masters, fell still. Across the blue planet, the people raised their eyes to the sky, not in fear, but in wonder. For the first time, hope felt larger than despair. Yet Cecil's heart carried a weight heavier than steel. His brother's sins could not be washed away with a word, nor his own doubts erased with a single victory. The giant was stilled, but the true source of its malice, the hate of Zemus, remained. And so, with Galbez choosing another path and Cain standing beside them once more, Cecil and his companions prepared to step into the unknown. Chapter 17, The Heart of the Moon. The silence after the giant's fall did not last long. The wail of the moon rose once more, carrying Cecil and his companions beyond the clouds, back to the silver plains where it had all begun. The crystal palace shone brighter than before, as though urging them forward. Fusoya spoke of Zemus, the sleeping Lunarian whose hatred had poisoned even dreams. He waits within the deepest chamber of the moon, the sage warned, and only there can his malice be undone. The surface stretched endless, seas of silver dust broken by mountains sharp as crystal spires. The sky held no sun, only a pale horizon where stars burned closer and colder than on the blue planet. Each step rang hollow, as though the moon itself listened to their passage. Cain walked among them in silence, his lance resting at his side. Though words came rarely, his steady presence carried weight, an oath unspoken, that he would not falter again. Yet within Cecil's heart, a steadier flame now burned, his brother's chains had been broken. Galbez, though heavy with guilt, walked beside them, no longer an enemy, but a man seeking redemption. At last they reached the crystal chamber. Zemuse awaited, his form still cloaked in the calm of slumber. But hatred does not rest. With a voice like thunder, he lashed out, not with blade or spell, but with the pure force of malice itself. The air grew heavy, as though the moon itself resisted their steps. Cecil and Galbez, two brothers bound by both blood and fate, raised their strength together. Light met shadow, not in conflict, but in harmony, pressing back against the waves of hate. At the final moment, when Zemuse stirred to awaken, Fusoya and Galbez called upon their deepest powers. Together, they sealed him, ending the threat, or so it seemed. When Fusoya and Galbez poured their strength into sealing Zemuse, the chamber fell still, but the air did not ease. Beneath the silence, Cecil felt it, like embers smoldering after fire. Hatred does not die so easily. The chamber grew quiet once more. The companions breathed a sigh of relief. But in the heart of the silence, something darker began to stir. Zemu's body faded, yet his hatred did not die. Instead, it gave birth to something new, something pure and terrible, Ziramus, the embodiment of despair itself. The battle they thought was won had only just begun. Chapter 18, The Final Light. The chamber trembled as hatred took form. Where once Zemuse had lain, now rose Ziramus, a being shaped not of flesh, but of darkness itself. His voice was no longer words, but the echo of despair, as if the moon itself mourned. The heroes, weary from their long journey, stood together. Cecil, his heart steady, raised his blade of light. Rydia called forth her summons, each spirit answering her voice with loyalty. Edge moved with silent resolve, striking swiftly where shadows deepened. Rose's prayers wrapped them in healing light, while Cain leapt high, spear gleaming like a star across the void. Each strike was more than an attack, it was his vow of redemption, proof that he now fought by his own will alone. Yet even with all their courage, Ziramus pressed upon them with the weight of endless hate. Spells of ruin fell like storms. The air burned. Hope wavered. And then, in the stillness between heartbeats, voices rose. From Mysidia, the elder's voice rose first, their voices braided together, a single light rising from countless hearts. The mages of Mysidia stood in the Tower of Prayers, their voices lifted in one song of light, calling forth the strength of the crystals and the courage of humankind. Cecil felt it first, a warmth within his chest, like the voice of his father once more. Each of his companions, too, felt the strength of those who believed in them. The bonds of the world itself gathered in that single chamber. The crystals, too, stirred with that same light, their long vigil answered at last. Their power flowed into Cecil's blade, not as a weapon of war, but as the will of the blue planet itself. The light grew brighter. Ziramus roared, but his hatred could not consume what was born of love, sacrifice, and hope. With one final surge, Cecil raised his blade, the light of a paladin, the love of a brother, and the prayers of a planet burning within its edge. The strike fell. Darkness cracked. And with a final cry, Ziramus dissolved into silence, his hatred scattered into nothingness. For a long while, there was quiet. The moon seemed to breathe again, silver and calm. The heroes stood, weary but alive, the weight of the journey settling into memory. At the edge of the Crystal Palace, Galbez lingered. He could not walk the blue planet's soil, not yet, perhaps not ever. His eyes, free at last, turned to Cecil one final time. No words were spoken, none were needed. One brother would rule below, the other seek penance above. Yet in their silence was something new, not hatred, not regret, but understanding. Cecil and his companions returned to the blue planet. The wail of the moon glided down one last time, leaving the heavens quiet above. On Earth, the world was healing, kingdoms rebuilding, friends reunited, the sacrifices of the fallen remembered in silence and gratitude. And so, beneath the sky of their planet, Cecil took Rose's hand. Where once his path had been uncertain, now it was clear. The battles were over. The darkness had been faced. What remained was life, fragile, precious, and worth every step of the journey. The story of the crystals had ended, but the light of the blue planet shone on, gentle and enduring, a reminder that even in the deepest night, hope can rise like dawn. Epilogue, A New Dawn. The battle against Zemus and Zeramis had ended, and silence returned to the heavens. The light of the crystals faded gently, and the blue planet shone once more with the promise of renewal. In Baron, Cecil was crowned king, with Rosa at his side as queen. The halls that once echoed with the footsteps of soldiers now filled with laughter, music, and the quiet hope of rebuilding. Cain, still carrying the burden of his own choices, set out alone on a journey of reflection. He parted not from rejection, but from love, knowing that to walk beside his friends again, he must first find peace within himself. In the solitude of the mountains, he sought that answer. Across the lands, each companion found their place. Rydia's laughter echoed once more among the summons she called family. Yang ruled Fabul with wisdom, Edward healed and guided Damcian with gentle song, and Edge, though restless, rebuilt Eblin with fiery determination. Sid laughed heartily as he worked on new inventions, his spirit unbroken, always ready to lend his strength to those he loved. And in Mysidia, Palom and Porum were restored, their youthful laughter once more filling the halls of the temple, a quiet reminder that even great sacrifices need not end in sorrow. And on clear nights, when the moon rose high, the people of the blue planet would gaze upward and remember. The journey had been one of hardship and sacrifice, but also of friendship, forgiveness, and hope. The world endured, not because darkness was destroyed forever, but because light had been chosen again and again. Thus the blue planet turned, alive with promise, watched over by those who had fought to protect it. A story of courage, never truly ending, but living on in every dawn that followed. And far above, in the quiet halls of the moon, the Lunarians dreamed on, no longer haunted by hatred, but waiting in peace for the day their worlds might walk together.